Hello and welcome to another full step-by-step PC build guide, and today I'm really excited to be putting a build together in the brand new Phanteks NV7. Ever since I first seen this case, I've been absolutely dying to get my hands on it, so the wait is over and I'm really excited to be doing this today. I've got some really cool parts to put in this PC and I think they're going to go so well. So let's take a look at the parts I'm going to be building with today. For the motherboard, I'm going to be using the ASUS ROG STRIX Z790 e-gaming Wi-Fi. For the CPU, I'm going to be using Intel's 13th Gen i7, the 13700K. Keeping our CPU cool, I've got a 360mm AIO from DeepCool. It's the LT720 in black. For RAM, I've got 32GB of Kingston Fury Beast ARGB DDR5 at 5600 megatransfers per second. For storage, I'm going with a single Gen 4 NVMe M.2 SSD for this build. It's from TEAMGROUP and it's their CARDEA A440 Pro in 1TB capacity. Powering the whole build, I've got a 1200 watt fully modular titanium power supply from BQuad. It's the Dark Power Pro 12. And because I'm going to be using a 40 series GPU in this build, I've also picked up their 12V high power PCIe adapter cable. For the graphics card, I'm going to be using the Aorus Master RTX 4070. For case fans, I'm going to be using Phanteks' brand new D30-120 fans, and I've got a mixture of regular and reverse fans for the build. Okay, that's all the parts. Let's take a closer look at the case. So to remove our tempered glass side panel, we need to open the mesh door in the back of the case. We've then got two captive thumb screws which we need to loosen, and then we're going to be able to slide the panel backwards, tilt it out and lift away. Removing the front tempered glass panel is optional, but it will give us more access for the build, so I'm going to do it. There's two screws we need to remove. With the two screws removed, we're going to be able to pull this panel forwards and lift away. At the rear of the case, we've got our instruction manual and case accessory box. I'll show you what this contains later on. To remove the case's top panel, we've got two captive thumb screws we need to loosen. Then with the thumb screws at the back loosened, we're going to be able to slide our top panel backwards and lift up and away. If we take a look at the panel we've just removed, you'll notice there's no separate dust filter underneath it. It's just mesh, although the pattern in it is fairly fine. Just while we're at the top of the case, I'll point out the buttons that we have. The first four buttons are to control the case's built-in ARGB controller, and it is a dual channel controller. There's two different channels on it that you can plug into, and this button is for switching between channel A and channel B. We've then got a button to control the speed of the ARGB effect, the color of the ARGB effect, and also the mode. And then as well, we've got our power button. If you're thinking of going with a custom loop, you'll be pleased to see we've got a cutout for a fill port at the top of the case. So you might be wondering why we've got this mesh panel on the back of the case, and I think the idea behind it is to improve the aesthetics at the back of the case, but hopefully because we've got mesh in it without altering the airflow. Aesthetics is a big thing at the back of this case, and you notice we've got all these little cutouts here, and the idea behind these is you're going to be able to pass your cables coming from your power supply and your motherboard, bring them out through these cutouts and keep them organised down at the bottom of the case. So as I've mentioned, you can open this back door. You can get your finger into here and swing it open. The back door is also removable, and to do that all you need to do is lift it upwards and away. Again, taking a look at the back of the door, there's just mesh on it, there's no separate dust filter. So with the door removed, you can see that our power supply is going to go at the top, and you can see what I mean about the cable management. So you can pop the cables coming from your power supply into these little organisers at the side, and that's going to keep everything nice and tidy. We've got an additional Velcro strap here, which is going to hold the cable. And then we've got two options for the cable. We can simply push it into these slots at the bottom, where when the door is going to go on it, everything is going to look nice and tidy. Alternatively, we've got this large rubber grommet down at the bottom of the case. So if you don't want to bring the cables through these clips at the front, you can bring all your cables directly through this rubber grommet, including your power supply cable. And then close the door back over again. You're going to see the back of the case is going to look really clean, and the cables are really nicely organised down at the bottom. And again, if you're planning on going with a custom loop, you'll be pleased to see we've got a cutout for a drainage port at the rear of the case. To remove our other side panel, there's a single screw at the top of the case that we need to remove. And with the screw at the top removed, we're simply going to lift this panel off. You can't actually get your hand in at the bottom to lift it off, but we do have two little cutouts at the top here you can slip your finger into, lift the panel up and away. Again, if we take a look at the back of this panel, you'll notice we've got a cutout for our power supply's intake fan, but again, we've just got mesh, no separate dust filter. The mesh part of the side panel isn't removable, and its presence indicates that you're going to be able to side mount fans and radiators in the case. So in terms of fan and radiator mounting options, at the side of the case it's up to 4 120mm fans or up to 360mm radiator. Again, at the top of the case, it's up to a 360mm radiator, but this time it's only up to 3 120mm fans. And it is important to say at both the top and at the side, you cannot fit 140mm fans or 280mm radiators. It's only in multiples of 120. At the bottom of the case, you can fit up to 3 120 and this time also 3 140mm fans. And again, radiator support is up to a 360, but you can also fit a 280mm radiator at the bottom. While at the rear of the case it's up to 2 120mm fans or up to 240mm radiator, and if you're going with the radiator mount, you can actually remove this mesh panel at the back and then mount your radiator in the rear compartment where it's going to be hidden behind the mesh door at the back of the case. So to remove the mesh panel, there's just a single screw at the top. Then with our screw removed, we can simply tilt the panel down and lift away. So what Phanteks recommend, if you're going with fans at the back of the case, you can put the mesh panel back on after installing your fans. If you're going with the radiator, obviously you leave it off and you're able then to install your radiator in the rear compartment where it's going to look really clean. And if I just set 2 fans into place at the back, you're going to see how this is going to work. Your fans are going to be in the inside of the case, your radiator is going to go in the back, and then you're going to have space at the top for your tubes. So this is going to look really, really clean with the radiator hidden in this compartment behind the mesh door. At the bottom of the case, we've got a removable fan stroke radiator bracket. So we just need to loosen it up with a thumb screw at the back. And then with the thumb screw removed, we can simply pull the bracket towards the front of the case, and then we're going to be able to lift it up and away. So I've just put the bracket back into place because I want to show you there's 2 different options for mounting fans on the bracket. With the bracket in its default position, if we're to set fans into place, they're going to be sitting straight on the bracket, blowing air straight up towards the top of the case. If we're again to take the bracket out, rotate it round and then slide it back into place, you'll notice now there's a tilt on the bracket. It's tilted downwards towards the front of the case. So we're to set our fans onto the bracket, they're going to be sitting at an angle. So you're going to get a much better look at the fans looking in from the front of the case. So again, the fan stroke radiator bracket on the side is removable. We've got a thumb screw at the top, which we need to remove. And once the thumb screw has been removed, the bracket can be tilted out and lifted away. In terms of motherboard support, in a case this large, as you'd expect, it's up to AITX. And if you want to go with a CPU killer, the maximum height supported is 185mm. At the rear of the case, we've got 8 horizontal PCI expansion slots, and in terms of graphics card support, you shouldn't have any problem fitting your graphics card in this case, with up to a maximum length of 450mm being supported. So another really nice feature we've got is an ARGB lighting strip above the motherboard and running down the right hand side. Now these panels, as well as having some ARGB on them, they are functional in the fact that they actually help hide the cables plugging in to the motherboard. They are removable. So the top one we need to simply just push over towards the right hand side and then it can be lifted down and away. While to remove the one over at the right hand side of the motherboard, there's a thumb screw at the back we need to remove. And then with the thumb screw at the back removed, we're going to be able to pull this panel down and lift out. So you can see with the cable removed, it is covering these rubber grommets running through to the back of the case. So with the bracket in its default position, it's designed for up to an ATX motherboard. If you're going with an EATX motherboard, because it's going to extend further out to the side, what you're going to want to do, rather than installing the bracket in this position, if we turn it round this way here and slide it into place here, and then push it up to the top, you'll see it covers less of the rubber grommets, so it's going to be in a better position for an EATX motherboard. So taking a look at the front side of our case, you might notice that it sits quite low towards the table, and you might be concerned about airflow. And if we take a look at the other side, you'll realise there was no need to worry at all because we've got absolutely loads of space at this side, and the reason for this is because the bottom of the case is actually on an incline. So taking a look in from the front, you can see the incline, and I think this is actually going to make the case look really clean because it brings the bottom down at the front, but you've still got loads of space at the back for airflow. And then again, you'd also have the options to have your fans tilted on the bottom of the case to get a really good look at them. In terms of our front I/O, we've got 2 USB Type A ports, a single Type C port, and a combined headphone and microphone jack. It is possible to move this I/O module to the rear of the case, and I'll show you how to do that. So to free up our I/O module, we're going to need to remove the 2 screws at the bottom. So with the screws removed, we can push the I/O module down and pull it forward to free it up. And then we free up the I/O cables at the back. We should then simply be able to pull the I/O module forward to remove it. Then at the rear of the case, we've got this little cover to remove, so it's just a matter of squeezing the 2 ends together from underneath, and then we're going to be able to lift the cover off. We can then pass our I/O cables up from the underside of the cutout and then pass them through this compartment here to the rear of the case. Then with all our cables in place, it's just a matter of lining the I/O module up with the little clips here and then pushing it into place. And then we can secure it into place at the back with the same 2 screws we removed at the front. So that's what the I/O module looks like on the rear of the case. I personally prefer it at the front, so I'm going to put it back to the stock configuration. So our case's 1 and only dust filter is at the bottom, and it can simply be pulled out from the side for cleaning. So taking a look in the rear compartment, our power supply is going to go here at the top. We've got plenty of Velcro cable strips and cable raceways here to help organise our cables, and there looks to be absolutely loads of space for cables here, so we shouldn't have any trouble with cable management. So you can see at the top of the case we've got our dual channel ARGB controller. So at the top we've got a port which goes to the control buttons on the top of the case, allowing the buttons at the top of the case to control this controller. We've got 2 different channels. We've got channel A1 and A2 and B1 and B2, and you can see we've already got something plugged into channel A1. It's a dual connector on it, and it's the cables going to the 2 ARGB lighting bars around the motherboard. So if we go ahead and unplug the cable from the controller, you can see our controller uses JST connectors. So if the fans that you're using don't have this connector on it, the Phanteks fans will work with it. You may need an ARGB to JST cable. So we'll put this back into place. And then the final thing to mention is down at the bottom we have an optional port for connecting this controller up to your motherboard. So in the case accessory box you get this cable here. We can simply slot it into place in this bottom port. And then on the other end we've got a standard 3-pin 5-volt ARGB cable which would plug into an ARGB header on your motherboard, allowing your motherboard to control everything that you've plugged in to this controller. Final thing to mention is don't forget to plug the 2 SATA cables coming from the controller into your power supply. One's labelled channel A and one's labelled channel B, and these actually power the controller. So if you don't plug these into your power supply, your controller isn't going to work. Okay, so working our way down towards the middle of the case, we've got this door here with a captive thumb screw on it. So we go ahead and loosen the thumb screw, we're going to be able to open up this door. So this door here serves 2 purposes. The first is as a cable cover. So there's got a space here behind the motherboard for some cables to go into, and we've got these little pins here where you're designed to wrap your EPS and 24-pin cables round, helping take the slack away from them at the back of the case for a cleaner look. And the other thing that we're going to be able to do is mount 2 2.5-inch drives. So it's just a simple matter of sliding our drive in from the top. There we go. And then if we close the door, we're going to be able to slide another drive into place on the other side. And then in terms of securing the drive, you can see we've got screw holes here on the side, so it's going to be 2 screws per drive. So with the door closed, I think that mounting solution looks nice and clean, and all the cables are going to be organised nicely behind the door. We've got another door at the bottom of the case, and again we've got a captive thumb screw at the top which we need to loosen to get the door to fold down. So on the left side of this panel we're going to be able to mount up to a total of 4 2.5-inch drives, while on the right side it's a single 3.5-inch drive. If you prefer, you can mount 2 3.5-inch drives, 1 on each side. So we've got a little separate bracket here which we can loosen with a thumb screw. And then with the thumb screw loosened up, we can simply slide this bracket away. So all you're going to simply do is set your drives here, so you can have your 2 3.5-inch drives or your 3.5-inch drive with 2 2.5-inch drives. And then if we look at the other side of the bracket, all the holes are labelled depending on what you're going for. So it'll just be a simple matter of then screwing these drives in from the back. So once you've got your 2 2.5-inch drives installed here, screwed in from the back, you're going to take this little plate and you're going to put your next 2.5-inch drives on here. Again, we've got holes in the back to screw them into place. And then once they're screwed in, all you're simply going to do is slot this back down again, and then you're going to have your 4 drives secured here, with a space for 1 3.5-inch drive here. If you don't want to install a 3.5-inch drive and you just want to install up to 4 2.5-inch SSDs, rather than having the 4 drives sitting on top of each other, you do have another option. So you can install your 2 drives onto here, and then you can take this little plate with your 2 drives installed on it, slot it into here, and then secure it into the back with a thumb screw. So it's just going to spread your drives over a little bit more space. But obviously if you're going with a bigger 3.5-inch drive on this side, you're not going to be able to mount this plate here. So this whole bracket is removable, and that will give us better access during the build process to the ports up below the motherboard. So to do that, all we need to do is put it towards the front of the case and lift away. So this is everything that comes in the case accessory box. So we've got a nice colour user manual. We've got all our screws individually sorted in a plastic box. We've got plenty of cable ties. We've got 2 cover plates. I'll show you how to use these in a minute. We've got the ARGB cable for syncing up the case's built-in ARGB controller with your motherboard. We've got a GPU support bracket and a cleaning cloth. So next thing I want to do is show you how these little cover plates work. So they're designed if you're going with 3 fans at the side. You're going to have a gap at the top and a gap at the bottom. 2 problems with that gap. One, it doesn't look very clean. And the second is it is going to potentially affect the airflow of the case because you're going to have large gaps without any fans on them. So these little cover plates have magnets on the back, and they're designed just to simply be slotted at the top and at the bottom. So I think you'll agree this looks so much better. The next thing I want to do is show you how to install our GPU support bracket. So we look at this side cover, we've got 2 screws here which we're going to fix the bracket to. So all I've done is secure the bracket together with a little thumb screw at the bottom. You'll notice we've got another hole here, so we could have this hole secured with this thumb screw over here if you've got a smaller GPU. And then all it is a simple matter of setting the bracket onto here at the side and putting 2 thumb screws into here. So what you're going to want to do is just put the thumb screws in loose first of all, so you're going to be able then to slide this up to where it provides support to your graphics card and then tighten up the thumb screws holding it in place. Likewise, this bracket you're going to leave on fairly loose at the start. Once you've got your graphics card in, then slide it into place up against the graphics card and tighten this thumb screw to hold it in place. We're now ready to start working on our motherboard, and we're going to be installing our CPU, the backplate for our CPU cooler, our M.2 SSD and our RAM before we put the motherboard into the case. To open the socket for our CPU cooler, we need to push the lever down and out and then bring it all the way to the top, and then we can open up the socket cover. We can then set our CPU down into the socket, line it up with the notches at the top and at the bottom, and making sure the text is the correct way up. Once it's in the socket, it's just a little wiggle from side to side to check it's properly seated, and then we can go ahead and close the socket cover down again. Now with the Intel motherboards, I much prefer to get the black bit of plastic to pop off at this stage by pushing down here, and then what we're going to do is set this in our motherboard box for safekeeping. And then to secure the CPU, all we need to do is close the lever down again. So our motherboard has 5 M.2 SSD slots behind these heatsinks. The top one is a Gen 5 slot, whereas the bottom 4 are Gen 4 slots. We've got a Gen 4 drive to install, so we could install it in the top slot. The only slight problem with this is it shares PCIe lanes with the top PCIe slot for the graphics card. So if we install a drive in the top slot, it reduces the PCIe lanes from 16 to 8 for our graphics card. That might be a sacrifice you're prepared to take if you've got a Gen 5 drive and you're going to benefit from the improved speeds. But because we've only got a Gen 4 drive, we're not going to get any advantage using the Gen 5 slot. So it's better for us to use one of the Gen 4 slots below. Now the 4 Gen 4 slots below aren't created equally. 3 of the slots go via the chipset, whereas with this bottom one here goes directly to the CPU. So this is the one we should install our drive in. Next, we can insert our drive into the slot, wiggling it down into place. We can then flatten our drive down, and we've got this little clip here, which if we close over, is going to hold our drive in place. If you're using the motherboard from new, you'll have some plastic protection on the back of the heatsink that you're going to need to remove. I've already used this motherboard for a previous build, so you can see the plastic protection has been removed, so that we can then return our heatsink. Next, we've got our RAM to install. As we've only got 2 sticks, we're going to install it in the 2nd and 4th slot along from the CPU, so we can open the clips on these slots. Then it's just a matter of lining our RAM up with these slots. Once we're happy everything's lined up, it's just some firm pressure to the RAM and it's going to clip into place. And then same thing with our 2nd stick, line it up with a slot, and again, once we're happy it's all lined up, some firm pressure, and it's going to clip into place. Next, we've got the backplate for our CPU cooler to install, so we're going to want to make sure all these pins are pulled to the outer setting, and then it should just be a matter of lining it up with the holes in the back of the motherboard. And then we've got one of these little spacers labelled 1700 to go onto each corner. We can then set the motherboard into the case, line it up with the standoffs at the back, and you'll notice that once we get the middle standoff into place, it's going to help hold the motherboard. We can then secure the motherboard to the case with 9 screws from the case accessory box. The next thing to do is get our case cables plugged in, and our HD audio cable is going to go into this header down the bottom left hand side of the motherboard. So we can bring the header through the cutout at the bottom, and we're going to plug it in with the HD audio text facing down the way. And then we'll pull the excess cable through to the bottom. Our front panel connectors are going to go to this header down the bottom right hand side of the motherboard, and it's the pins over to the left hand side that we're going to want to use. And Phanteks have combined the cables into one single cable for us to plug in. And it is important that we plug it in with the power switch text facing up the way. So it's just a matter of lining things up and pushing into place, and then we can pull the excess cable through to the back. Our USB 3.0 cable is going to go into this header here, so we can bring the cable through the cutout, line it up with the header and push into place, and pull the excess cable through to the back. Just above that, we've got our front panel Type C header, so we'll bring our cable through the cutout, line it up with the header, and push into place, and again pull the excess cable through to the back. We're now ready to install our power supply, and I've gone ahead and plugged in the cables that we're going to need. So I plugged in a 24-pin cable, 2 8-pin EPS cables to provide additional power to our CPU, and I plugged in this adapter cable that I've got. It goes into 2 of the PCIe adapters on the power supply and has a 12-volt high power cable on the other side. If you don't have an ATX 3.0 power supply, or your power supply doesn't have one of these special adapters, what you can do is use the adapter that comes with the graphics card. It's got a 12-volt high power connector on one side, and on the other side it's 2 8-pin PCIe cables. So we just plug in the standard PCIe cables to the back of your power supply, and then you would plug 2 separate cables into the end of this adapter. It's important you don't just use one cable from the power supply and plug in the 2 daisy chain connectors into here. You need 2 separate PCIe cables coming from different ports in your power supply into each end of these adapters. This obviously isn't going to look as good, which is the reason why I picked up this extra cable. And this is a really expensive power supply, and when the new connector came out, it was great that Be Quiet had offered this special cable that's going to let you continue to use the power supply with nice cables. The other cable that I've plugged in is a SATA cable. Although we're not installing any SATA drives, our ARGB controller is going to need SATA power, so that's the reason I've installed it. So we can then set our power supply into place at the top of the case and slide it all the way to the back. Now importantly, this is our power supply's intake fan, so we're going to want to have it facing out the way. So for most power supplies, you're going to use 4 of the larger screws from the case accessory box to secure the power supply to the case. The problem with this Be Quiet power supply is it's a really high-end power supply, and they use a lot of custom bits to it. So the screw thread doesn't quite match, and whenever I try to screw it in, it's not going in. We've got these special thumb screws that come with the power supply, so I'm going to use it. So next thing to do is get our power supply cables plugged in. So our 2 8-pin EPS cables are going to go into these headers at the top left of the motherboard. So we can bring the cables through the cutout, line them up with a header, and push into place. And then we can pull the excess cable through to the back. Our 24-pin cable is going to go into this header here, so we'll bring it through the cutout, line it up with the header, and push into place. And again, we'll just pull the excess cable through to the back. Then at the back of the case, we've got the 2 SATA cables coming from our ARGB controller that we need to plug into the SATA cable coming from our power supply. So one slight issue I'm noting at this stage is I don't think we're going to have enough length on our 12-volt high power cable. Because our power supply is all the way at the top and this is such a tall case, this is the cable pulled as tight as I can get it at the back, and we've quite a big graphics card, so the 12-volt high power connector is going to be about here, and to actually get this turned round, because it is quite stiff, is going to be almost impossible. So I don't think this cable is going to work, and what I'm probably going to need to do is use some cable extensions. So the only cable extensions I have for the 12-volt high power cable are actually in white, so if I'm going to be using them, it makes sense to change out the 24-pin cables and also the EPS cables, so I'll go ahead and do that now. Okay, so that's the white cable extensions added in, and we're not going to have any problem now with our 12-volt high power cable getting up to our graphics card, and in fact it's going to look even cleaner because rather than bringing it in through the cutouts at the side and coming across to the graphics card at an awkward angle, we're going to be able to actually bring it through the bottom cutout. So I'm just going to bring this back to the back of the case for now. So the next thing for us to do is install our case fans, and they come in two different versions. So this is the standard fan where the fan blades are round the right way. And with most standard fans, if you want to have your fan set to intake on the case, you have to reverse it. And the big problem with that is the back of this fan being on display looks awful compared to the front of the fan blades. Now Phanteks have thought about this, and they offer these fans in two different versions. The regular ones with the fan blades the normal way round, and you've also got these reversed fan blades. So the reversed ones, this would be set to intake on the side of the case, so it would be bringing air in, but you would also have the good side of the fan facing into the case. So we're going to start off by installing the fans on the side, and we're going to have 4 of these set to intake. Okay, so the first thing for us to do is to connect our fans up together. You'll notice on the side of the fan we've got some ARGB effects here, and on this side, this is where the fans are actually going to connect together. You can pick out that orientation because you've got these little lines which are going to go together from one fan to the next fan. So you're going to want to make sure you line them up this way round. The other important thing to note, there's a little sticker here which tells us this is the input side of the fan. So we're going to have an input lined up with an output on the next fan. So if we look here, we've got little indentations here, and if we take another fan, you've got little bits that protrude. So what we're going to want to do is line the 2 fans up together, and what we'll notice, we'll have an input here, output, input, output. And you're able to connect up to 4 fans together, so I'm just going to line 4 fans up. So what I'm going to do now is just remove the little bits of paper telling us which side is the input. Then we're going to use this little connector to join the fans together. So it's just a matter of lining the fans up at the side and then pushing the connector into place. And then just working our way along, making sure we've got the fans lined up correctly, and then just a little bit of pressure to clip it into place. On the other side of the fans, you'll notice there's no actual connectors between the fans, so we've got these plain plastic clips that we can push into place. So the big advantage of us joining all our fans together is that we're actually going to need to plug one cable into one of the fans, and that's going to allow us to control up to 4 fans with this one cable. Now it is really important that you plug the cable into the section of the fan labelled input and not the output on the end of the fan. If you've already pulled off the stickers and you can't remember which was which, the input side is the side with the little indentations in it. So all we're going to want to do is take this end of the connector and push it all the way in at the side here, and then all we need to do is rotate it round and it's going to lock into place. So the cable that we have plugged in has 2 different connectors coming from it. The first is a 4-pin PWM connector, which we need to plug into our motherboard, and that'll let our motherboard control the speed of the fans. The other cable is for the ARGB lighting effects on the fans, and on the end of it we've got a JST connector. So Phanteks use these, and if you've got a Phanteks fan hub like we do in our case, we're going to be able to plug it directly into the fan hub. The other nice thing is we've got an additional connector here, so we are going to be able to daisy chain more devices into it. If you don't have somewhere to plug in a JST connector, that's not a problem, because with the triple pack of the fans, you get this little adapter that plugs into here, and then we've got a standard 3-pin 5-volt ARGB connector, and you can plug that into an ARGB header on your motherboard. For this particular build, I'm going to be plugging directly into our case's controller, so I'm not going to install this. So Phanteks have gone all out in making these fans look really clean. So they have provided little covers to cover over the screw holes. So if you're installing this on a radiator and you're going to be screwing down into the radiator, obviously install the fans onto the radiator first of all before removing the covers on, because otherwise you're not going to be able to screw it in. We're going to be screwing in from the back, so we can go ahead and put these screw hole covers into place. So we've got the double ones for where the fans are joined together. It's just a matter of pushing them down into place. And then we've got these single ones to go on at the ends. Phanteks are also really keen to make sure all the corners look nice and clean as well. So we've got these blank plastic corner plates for the ends that you're not going to be putting a fan cable onto. So it's just a matter of, again, lining it up at the side and then moving it round to the side and clipping into place. And then we can repeat that for the other 2 corners. So that's our fans looking really clean from every angle, and we've just got this dual cable coming from them. We can then set our fans onto the fan bracket. So as you'd expect, the fans do come with the standard fan screws, but as well in the box, Phanteks also include radiator screws. So this is going to be really useful depending on how you're planning on using the fans. So we can go ahead and secure the fans to the bracket using the standard fan screws. So just before I set our side fan bracket into place, I'm going to pass the cables coming from it through to the back of the case. I'm then going to set our side bracket up into place. And then as I push it backwards, I'm just going to make sure I keep the cables tight and pull them all the way through to the back. And then we can replace the thumb screw at the top. So I've added 3 reverse fans to our bottom fan bracket, and setting them up is exactly the same as the 4 fans at the back. So we're just going to slide the bracket into place at the bottom and then push towards the back of the case to secure it into place. And you'll see I've gone with the decision to install the bracket on an angle because I think it's going to look better. And then we can secure the bracket into place with a thumb screw. I'm then going to route the cables coming from our bottom fans through to the back. I've got 2 standard fans set as exhaust at the back, so the first thing to do is pass our fan cables through to the back, and then we can set the fans up into place. We can then secure the fans into place at the back. Then we can set the rear fan grille back into place, and we'll secure it into place with the screw we removed at the start. This cable then I'm just going to route through to the back, and with a little cable tie down point here at the back, I'm just going to use one of the included cable ties to secure it. We've got 3 system fan headers down at the bottom of the motherboard, so I'm just going to bring our PWM cables through and get them plugged into the headers at the bottom of the motherboard. And then we can pull the excess cable through to the back. I'm then going to plug the ARGB cable coming from our rear fans into channel B1 on our hub, and then plug our side fans into channel B2. So that's going to leave our bottom fans into channel A2. We're now ready to start working our AIO, and it comes with these plain black fans. But Phanteks has sent me loads of these D30-120 fans, so I'm planning to use these on the radiator instead. Now, because we actually have absolutely loads of space at the top of the case, these fans here aren't going to be wasted. I'm actually going to install them in a push-pull configuration, which is actually going to fill the space at the top of the case a little better. But the first step for us is to put 3 of these regular fans onto the radiator. So these fans are really quite thick. They're much thicker than the ones that came with the AIO. So you're going to need the radiator screws that comes with the Phanteks fans to reach through the fans and get to the radiator. If you try to use the ones that come with the AIO, they won't actually reach the radiator. The standard black fans we're going to attach on the other side of the radiator, but we're going to save this to when we're putting the AIO into the case. Next, we're going to do some work on our pump, and it's got this ARGB cover on it, which is magnetically attached, and we can simply pull it away. So next we're going to need to add the Intel bracket to the pump. If you get this cooler from new, you're going to have some thermal paste and some plastic protection over the cold plate. And to install the bracket, you're going to need to remove the plastic protection. So if you're doing this from new, what I would recommend doing is do this step once you've installed the radiator to the top of the case, so that you're not going to contaminate the thermal paste on the cold plate. It's much easier for me to show you it here. You're going to get a better view of it with me doing it on the table. And because I don't have any thermal paste pre-applied, it's not going to be a problem for me. So the first thing to do is set one of our Intel brackets into place. We're then going to take one of the screws, which if we set it into place, it will attach magnetically. We can pop one on the other side, and then it's just a matter of screwing these into place. Then same thing on the other side, we're just going to set our bracket into place. So now what I'm going to do is set our DeepCool fans onto the radiator, just setting them into place where they would line up with the holes in the radiator. And again, I'm making sure the cables are all coming out towards where the radiator is going to be at the back of the case. There we go. And then included with our AIO, we get this triple splitter cable. So what I'm going to do is insert one of the cables coming from each of the fans into the triple splitter cable. So that's going to leave us one 4-pin PWM connector coming from all 3 of the DeepCool fans, which are going to plug into our CPU fan header. We're going to have another PWM cable coming from the Phanteks fans on the other side of the radiator, and our motherboard has a CPU opt header, which will run the fans along the same fan curve as the CPU fan header. So we're just going to plug it into the CPU opt header. And we're not going to have any ARGB lighting on the DeepCool fans. The ARGB lighting on our Phanteks fans is the same cable we've already plugged into our ARGB hub, and we're just going to plug this into our case hub. So then we can set our I/O into place at the top of the case. And then what we're going to need to do is pass one of the long radiator screws down through our DeepCool fans and then get it screwed into the radiator beneath. So I've actually used the Phanteks screws rather than using the screws that came with the I/O because there is quite a big size difference between the two of them, and the ones with the I/O are actually too short. I'll show you this. If I take one of these screws out, and then if I take one of the DeepCool screws and pass it through, you'll see that it goes all the way in and it doesn't lock at all into the radiator. They're just too short to use. Two other things to point out. I'm using a manual screwdriver, and the reason for this is I need to be able to feel if I've got the screw into the hole or not. The other thing is I put the screws in all loosely first of all, so I've still got a bit of adjustment on this, and I can position the radiator exactly where I want it to be in the case, and then I can tighten up all the screws. There's a little cutout through to the back just behind here, so I'm just going to route all the fan cables up and through to the back. So in terms of passing the cables through to the back, we've got a nice little cutout here which helps. We can pass the cable up from the main compartment through to here, pull it tight, and then pass it through here and be able to route it out to the back. So you might have noticed a problem during the cable management, and that is despite me putting these screws all the way in, the radiator is still mobile at the top of the case, and the Phanteks screws that I have used are just very slightly too long. So these screws are 36mm in length. The DeepCool ones that I used are 30mm and they are far too short. I've also tried 32mm screws which are also just a little bit too short as well. So somewhere probably in about that 34-35mm length is what you're going to want to use. So what I'm planning on doing is I've found 4 washers, and I'm going to be using these on the 4 end screws to hopefully hold things in place. So there we go, with the washers in place now, the radiator is completely fixed at the top. So if you were planning on doing this particular combination, you could either get yourself a set of washers and use the screws that are included with the Phanteks fans, or what you could do is probably pick up either 34 or 35mm radiator screws. Next, I'm going to add some thermal paste to the center of the CPU. If you're getting the I/O from new, it will have some pre-applied to the cold plate, so there's no need to add more. So a couple of things to point out before we install our pump on the motherboard. It's important we install the tubes at the bottom so the ARGB plate goes on the right way round. And one of the things I like to do is take the little cables and wrap them around these brackets, making sure they're away from the cold plate and bringing them up towards the top of the case, and it just means this cable is organised a little bit neater. I'm also going to set the ARGB cable up that comes from our ARGB cover, and then we can line our pump up with the bracket we installed on the motherboard earlier on. What we're then going to want to do is get a thumb screw onto each corner, and then just before we tighten everything up fully, I just want to make sure that none of our cables caught onto the cold plate, which they're definitely not, and then we can go ahead and tighten each of the thumb screws in turn. I'm then going to set our ARGB cover into place and just putting the cable through as we set it into place. There we go. And again, if you're getting the cooler from new, you'll have some plastic protection here that you need to remove. Then I'm going to route the cables up towards the top of the motherboard. The ARGB cable I'm going to pass through to the back, while the 3-pin fan connector I'm going to plug into the AIO header at the top of the motherboard. And then I'm just going to tuck the excess cable in behind. Next to our I/O pump header, we've got our CPU fan header. So I'm going to bring the triple splitter cable that we had our DeepCool fans on and plug it into this header, and then pull the excess cable through to the back. And our CPU opt header is just beside our EPS cables. So I'm going to bring the cable coming from our Phanteks fans on the radiator through, line things up with the header and push into place. And then we'll pull the excess cable through to the back. I'm then going to take the ARGB cable coming from the fans on the radiator and plug it onto the daisy chainable connector coming from our bottom fans. So then we've got the ARGB cable coming from our pump to plug in. We've got two options. We could plug it directly into an ARGB header on our motherboard. If we want to plug it into our controller, we're going to need to get an adapter. Now fortunately I do have one of the adapters. I'll put a link to this one in the description. So we've got the plug on it that's going to go into our controller, and on the other end we've got two standard 3-pin 5V ARGB headers. So all we need to do is line the cable coming up with this adapter cable and push into place. And then the other end I'm going to plug into one of the daisy chain connectors from the fans we've already plugged into the controller. Next we can return the ARGB cable covers around the motherboard, and we can then secure it in place with a thumb screw at the back. We're now ready to install our graphics card, and we're going to need to remove the second and third expansion slot cover from the top. I've also brought our 12V high power cable through the cutout at the bottom of the case, because once our graphics card is installed, we're going to have less access to bring it through. And I'm also going to set our GPU support bracket into place. Because our graphics card is so big, I think we're only going to have to use the bottom hole. So then we can press this little button on the motherboard to make sure the top PCIe slot is open. And then it's just a matter of lining our graphics card up with the top slot. So our top PCI expansion slot bracket is just preventing me getting the graphics card in. So I'm going to take the graphics card out and remove the bracket. So there we go, that's just lined up with the slot now, so it's just some firm pressure to the graphics card and it's going to clip into place. And then we can secure the graphics card into place with the two thumb screws we removed earlier on. And then at this stage I'm just going to reinsert the top expansion slot cover. So then I'm just going to slide our GPU support bracket up to where it's providing support for the graphics card, and then tighten the thumb screw at the bottom. I'm then going to slide the other thumb screw up to the graphics card and then tighten the thumb screw at the bottom as well. And then we can plug our 12V high power cable into the graphics card, making sure we get a nice satisfying click. And then we've got some cable combs on the cable to help organize it. Okay, last thing to do is some cable management, so we're going to be able to get our panels back on again. So that's the build complete, and I'm absolutely delighted with how it turned out. I think the combination of this case with the brand new Phanteks fans looks absolutely amazing, combined with the ARGB effects that are built into the case. I'm also really delighted with the new graphics card. It's absolutely massive, and this is a perfect case for it, and it looks so well in the middle of it. And in fact, all the hardware that I've picked for this build goes so well together, and I wouldn't change any of it. I think probably the only thing I would change is the white cable extensions. I think black ones would look better, but we were really stuck with the length on the 12V high power cable, and that's the reason I've gone with those. But it's good for me to pick up these issues during the build so that you can avoid them. So you can see I've gone ahead and set the PC up. The reason I've done that is this video is already long enough, and I made a previous step-by-step build guide setting up this motherboard. So what I'll do is I'll put a link to that video in the description. If you don't know how to install Windows, the drivers, get the RGB software up and running, enter the BIOS, update the BIOS and adjust the BIOS settings, I've made a previous video on it and I'll put a link to that video in the description. So I've gone ahead and dimmed the lights to give you a look at the ARGB effects coming from our case's built-in controller. So as I've mentioned, there's a button that lets you switch between the two channels. I've got both the channels set up exactly the same way. The button then beside the channel is for speed. So if I go ahead and press it, you'll notice that two lots of the fans, so the fans on the side and the fans at the rear of the case, have changed their speed, but they're on the same colours. I've got the fans at the bottom and the fans at the top plugged into the same channel as well. You'll also notice the speed of the lighting effects on the I/O is also sped up because I plugged it into the same channel as the fans on the side and the fans on the rear. So if I keep pressing the speed button, again it's going to start to slow down again. We've got the slowest movement here, and if I press it again, it goes to static. The next button along is for the colour, and at the moment I'm in the two-tone mode. So if I press the colour button, it's going to cycle through the various two-tone colours that we have. And that's us back to the start again. And then the final button is for mode. So if I want to change the fans at the bottom and the fans at the top, I'm going to have to press the channel button, and then any of the other buttons I press will change those channels. So let's go ahead and change the mode, and you'll notice the fans at the bottom and the fans at the top have then changed. You'll also notice the ARGB lighting bars around the motherboard have also changed colour because I have them plugged into the same channel as the fans at the bottom and the fans at the top. Obviously you can configure these any way that you want. So I'll press the buttons again and give you a look at that. So now we're on the static colours, I'll give you just a look at those as well. If you want to turn off the lighting, you need to hold the mode button in for 2 seconds, so I'll do that. And you see that's turned the lighting off on the particular channel that we're on, and then if I press the mode button again, it's going to turn the lighting back on. The only function that seems to be missing for me is the ability to control both channels at once, because what I'm having to do is adjust the settings on one channel and then go and replicate that on the other channel. I've tried all combinations of holding the mode button in, pressing it multiple times, but all it seems to really do is switch from one channel to the other, and there doesn't seem to be a way to control both channels at once. There may well be a way to do it, but I don't seem to be able to find the way to do it. So if you know how to do it, leave me a comment and let me know how it works. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go and do some thermal testing, and then I'm going to be back with the case review, and I'm going to tell you what I thought of the Phanteks NV7. If you made it to this stage in the video, I think I can probably give you a little spoiler alert. I absolutely love this case, but don't tell everybody else. They're going to have to sit to the end of the case review to find that out. So hopefully you have enjoyed this video. If you have, please remember to give it a thumbs up. And if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks for watching.